trying to bring you up a little bit to date before I introduce our speaker, who is Joseph Vance, and we're delighted to have him with us. Joe Vance is an award-winning architect in New York City who was recently moved to the town of Clinton. Yay! His firm specializes in residential design projects using 3D software that allows clients to visualize their project in virtual reality from inception through completion. Well, that's a real wonderful thing. I know, for having worked on many projects myself over the years. Mr. Vance will speak on architectural issues common in rural properties, including the renovation of a 1790s home and barns in the town of Clinton that he has recently acquired and is working on. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to Joe Vance. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Yeah, so I have an architectural practice in New York City in Chelsea. This is our 32nd year. We do only residential and single-family residential, and most of it are townhouses in the city. That's sort of our bread and butter. Also important background you'll find out through this talk is that I'm from Southern Indiana, and my family, my grandparents, had a 365-acre farm that I spent a great deal of my childhood on, and my father and one of my uncles still live there, and it's still a working farm, which has heavily impacted my life and what I'm doing right now here in Schultzville. So just a quick little thing here. Oh, and then also I really do have a passion for old buildings, and you'll see in a minute that it started very early on. One of my taglines that I get quoted as saying is that I love giving new life to old buildings. I've done a tremendous amount of work in the city, repurposing buildings from, especially converting them from manufacturing to residential and commercial to residential. And I've also been fortunate in my personal life to have owned 2 historic homes in Brooklyn, in landmark districts of Brooklyn. One was built in 1856 and the other in 1866. And the way I feel, and what I tell my clients even, is that I really like my clients to feel like we're just temporary caretakers of these properties. We're not really owners. It's not ours. We're just one person in that step of the way. And I see it as our job to do improvements to the homes so that they last hundreds of years more and we don't lose them. So with that, I will share my screen. And we will see my very, very first project. So when I was in architecture school, which was a 6-year program, and the second year when other people were learning to draw, I received my very first commission. And you see it in front of you. Just south of my hometown of North Vernon is a little village called Vernon. It's quite unique. The entire town is on the National Register. And what you see in front of you is a log cabin that, after research, I found out it was built in 1824 by someone who was vital to Indiana gaining statehood. Big, large, rambling house facing Courthouse Square. In the mid-70s, it burned down, and as they were demolishing it, they discovered, quite common for Southern Indiana, they found at the core of it this little log cabin. So this local attorney who knew me and my family bought it and asked me to restore it. It wasn't quite a textbook restoration. It's a rehabilitation, I called it. But it went from this to this. And apologies for the bad photo. This is way, way, way before digital. This is a scan of a slide from some little camera that wasn't great to begin with. But it was great. We jacked it up, put a modern basement under it. We clad the exposed foundation walls with stone that had been the original foundation stones. I lost my battle to get wood shingles on it and things like that. But I was pretty happy for this to be my very, very first project. Moving on, things that we do, we really like. These are always exciting things to take a property like the one on the right, which obviously has nothing left of any historic value on the facade, and doing our historic research, finding old photographs, bringing them into Photoshop, into our CAD software where we can scale and figure out the dimensions of things. We also we sort of do architectural archaeology. So we peel back layers of what you see on the right to find the shadows of things that used to be there. And that's how we come up with all these profiles. And I've got very nice comments from the New York City Landmarks Commission and the Historic District Council for this project. Another one, this is in Brooklyn Heights, interesting building, built in 1830, where my mouse is, that was the top of the facade when it was built. In the 1880s, a family purchased it and hired an architect who was prominent in the Brooklyn area, who was really into this neo-Flemish architecture, and did all this detail. At the time this photograph was taken, it was lived in by 8 families. It had sort of become in very poor shape. And we were lucky to have a very good client that was willing to spare no expense to bring it back to what it should have been. So especially on the top, you can see we recreated missing details. We had brick custom made in North Carolina to match the original brick. And another really fun thing, even on the sidewalk, the 1960s railing that was there, we were able to find, again, historic photos, and through bringing them into our CAD software where we could figure out dimensions, we had, this is all cast iron. We had custom molds made. So this is all custom cast. In 2005, just the railing that you see here was $60,000. So again, it was very fortunate to have a client who wanted to do the right thing. On a larger scale, this is all of these projects are in landmark districts. This is in Soho, believe it or not. This building that you see here, the white one, was built as manufacturing, and it was manufacturing up until the day in 2014 that I first walked into it. My client wanted it to be residential. So now it's an 11,000 square foot private residence, but rather unique. We excavated below the buildings all around us to put in a swimming pool and a full private spa underneath the house. And then we added a swimming pool on top of the house because, of course, you have to have indoor and outdoor swimming, apparently. And the client did this as an investment property. And for the last 5 years, it's been rented out to the tune of $125,000 a month. And then this last one, totally different scale. This is a warehouse in Tribeca. It was built and owned by the Roebling brothers, who you may know built the Brooklyn Bridge. And the building was used to store bridge cable. Not for the Brooklyn Bridge, this came along after that, but it was used to store bridge cable for their other projects. And I converted this to residential. The problem with it was it's 100-foot wide, 100-foot deep. And in New York City, any legally habitable room, any room other than a bathroom or a closet, has to be within 30 feet of a window. So I cut a large courtyard out of the middle of this to solve that problem. The next issue was we had an elevator that we needed to install near the front of the building, which would have, the shaft has to go above the rooftop. And Landmarks obviously didn't want to see that. And I got very lucky doing my research and found the original facade sketches from 1880 from the architect, who had originally designed what we call a frontispiece where my mouse is moving, but it was never built. That was very lucky for me because I was able to take his design and alter it. Originally, his design stopped at this horizontal band. I was able to get Landmarks to approve the stepping back that you see here, which is just an architectural way of masking the elevator shaft that has to come up above the top of the building. So this is called a special use project in order that it didn't comply with zoning. So we did something with Landmarks where we were required to go far further with preservation than normally required. And every 5 years for the rest of its life, we inspect it along with the Landmarks Commission, and anything they deem that should be done must be done. So that was a nice project. So now, on to this evening. It's a little bit interesting what I'm going to show you. So we started searching about a year ago for a property up here. The search was quite difficult. This was This was after the big COVID gold rush up here for properties. So there were fewer properties coming on the market. And our first problem was caused by Mr. Bob Schock, because prior to that, we'd been living on his farm for almost 2 years, and we were spoiled. That's what we wanted. We really wanted a historic house and 100 acres. Our budget did not cover the 100 acres. So that made our search difficult. The next thing that made our search difficult was actually all of you, in particular the Dragos, because we initially thought that we're going to draw a circle with a radius 20 minutes around Rhinebeck, and we're going to look all over this. And we looked and looked and looked and looked. And what we realized quickly was we didn't want to leave Clinton. And specifically, we didn't want to leave this little corner of Clinton. There's just something about the people here, about just everything here, that we wanted to stay. So all of that really narrowed our pool of possible things that we could buy. So we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. We were using Zillow, the app. The property that we bought that you're about to see, we saw it on Zillow and we just swiped right by. Like, nope, absolutely not. As time went on, we realized there were very few options. So we said, well, let's just go drive by. We drove by, and we actually drove by, did not slow down, did not stop. We said, this is not for us, no way. We just forgot about it. So in the end, though, we were running out of time, and I said, look, this is what I do for a living. Let's go, let's figure out if I can make this a project and do something with it. So we came here, we backed up into the neighbor's driveway across the street and said, okay, what's wrong with this picture? So this is the property, 19 Maple Lane. So we're right on the corner of Maple and Center. And this is the view from online. So you can see that we've got the house here, we have a barn here. The stream totally cuts the property into two pieces, leaving a small area in front and the majority of it back here, 16.7 acres. So from the listing said that the house was built in the late 1790s and altered in 1850. So we sat there and said, so why does this look like a Cape Cod colonial? Something's wrong with this picture. We don't know what it is. But there was something about it, something about the location. We love, being in Schultzville and being near all of our friends. So finally we said, you know what? We're going to pull the trigger. I had some ideas. They're fairly big ideas, you'll see, but we decided to move ahead. So now to the research, and you're going to wonder, looking at this, why am I talking to the Historical Society about this house of all houses? So after 60 some hours of research, here's why. These are the owners of the property. Before the house was built, it was owned by John Crook. In 1793, Frederick Schultz bought the property, being the Frederick Schultz, father of John Schultz, grandfather or father of Daniel, grandfather of Daniel, I think. And the Schultz family built the house somewhere in the late 90s, and they acquired an additional 42 acres, so the property became a 152-acre farm. And they lived here for 67 years. In 1860, they sold it to George Budd, who owned a lot of property up here, all over the place. They were big property owners. He built the two-story addition that I'm actually sitting in now, and added a lot of Victorian details to the building. Shortly thereafter that, in 1862, interestingly enough, after he'd already bought the property, 2.5 acres were transferred for the construction of the Christian church. That was in his will. It turns out that George Budd was one of the trustees of the church to be founded. And then he further, as you all know, donated $3,000 for the construction, as well as another $2,000 to build the Masonic Lodge. And in 1870, transferred the property to his son Lafayette P. Budd. And this is quite an interesting tidbit and frustrating tidbit of information. We've come across a letter from a woman whose family lived here starting in the 1930s, who said that the horse stable, which still exists here, Lafayette P. Budd, actually carved his name into it along with the date. And I've poured over every square inch of that building and cannot find it. So either it's inside and covered up with something that I haven't done any work to it yet. I'm really hoping he didn't do it outside. You know, it's a piece of siding that got rotted and fell off. But anyway, so the Budd family owned it for 60 years. It then went very quickly through Casper Aston and Herman Schmidt. And then it was sold to Abraham and Jesse Shohan. That's the family that I just spoke of. So we have a lot of written information from their daughter Ruth. And again, sort of such a sad story of timing. The people that we bought the house from have given us a folder of information, including Xeroxes of some old photos, which I'll show you. Way too much information about selling the walnut trees on the property. And we were busy diving in and doing work here, so I didn't really pay attention. When Bob asked me to do this talk tonight, I pulled it back out and found one of these letters from her. And she had an address in the letter. So we thought, you know what, who knows? Let's contact her. We Googled her and found out she had passed away 3 weeks earlier at the wonderful old age of 97 years old. But the online obituary listed the email addresses of her children. So we've corresponded with them and they've given us further information. So anyway, the farm had been run down by the time they got it. They moved here from the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Were not farmers, trained themselves to do what they could, kept it for 22 years, but in the end, sold off 60 of the 152 acres. Then in 1956, Frederick and Ruth Chalanda bought it, lived here for 36 years. We've spoken to a lot of people in the community that remember them. Then in 1994, it went to Robert and Catherine Long. They sold off the final piece across the street where our friend Bill Flood and Emily and John and other people now live in homes. 2004, Joseph Hallback. 2010, Yakov Goldberg and Yael Raviv, who we bought it from. And now it's us. So here's some more fun information. This is the farm as it existed way back when it was 152 acres. You can see that it goes on the other side of center, all the way over to Pumpkin at the top of the screen, and went down, you know, pretty far down into Schultzville, not too far away from Nine Partners. It was a pretty sizable farm. We found lots of documentation, especially in the wonderful 1850 census, which was the best census year ever. They tell us how many bushels of every crop they had, exactly how many hogs and cows and horses. It was really wonderful to see that. And this photo, which is the 1936 aerial photo from the Dutchess County parcel online, you can see the orchards across the street. This next photo, 1933, the only thing that's changed is on the lower left, the church and cemetery property are carved out. Then in 1956, it drops way back to this size. And then here we are today with almost 17 acres. Now, as was mentioned, our firm uses 3D technology extensively. So I've been doing a lot of work on this house since October. And a lot of forensic architecture, as I call it. And we're able to with some pretty high confidence, show you what it used to look like. So this is the house as it would have been built in the 1790s. And we have some very good evidence. This is one of the walls that's just about 10 feet away from me that still exists here in the basement level. Post and beam construction, and in between the posts, the cavity is filled with mud mixed with straw, which was still done in the late 1700s. Then sometime between then and 1862, the building on the left appeared. Now we've modeled it as it exists today. Those doors are 1940s garage doors. We don't know what it looked like then. Still post and beam construction with wooden pegs. But we do know, at least from what's been passed down through history, that this was their summer kitchen. You can see the fireplace, the chimney, which still exists. And this portion this is now a garage. This portion still has the old horsehair plaster on the walls. The big change came with George Budd. Like I said, they were big property owners, and I assume they were well-to-do property owners, and they embraced the Victorian era. So they added this addition. They added they enlarged the front porch, added the bric-a-brac on the columns, added rather ornate for the time and unusual railings in the porch, and added these two bay windows and a gable here in the front. And we're quite lucky again from the documentation left from the people that had been in the 30s to have proof of this. Now, apologies, this is a scan of a Xerox of a photograph. We've asked the family if they could, since they are now going through their mother's belongings, to please keep an eye out and see if they can find original copies of this. But this is very good evidence of this. Something unique to me as an architect is that this addition here, while it's attached to the house, is quite separate. If this had been in the city, we would have called this a mother-daughter house, something that extended family lived in. You'll see it has its own little porch, has its own entry, another entry over here. And we do know that at the time, it was only connected to the main house on the lower level. When we bought it, it had a stair that we've since removed that led from the lower level to the upper level, which had no connection to the house. And that upper floor is 18 inches higher than the same level of the main house. So it was not really connected. So it either was built for farmhands. We know from the census they had between 3 and 5 farmhands all the time, or it was, again, an extended family situation when that was built. And another cute photo there. Now comes the bad part. Near the end of World War II, I'm sorry, one more photo. This is a great photo of the barns. So right now, when you drive by the property, you only see this barn here and the horse stable, which is not in this picture, perpendicular to it. There were 2 other barns. The barn on the far left was demolished when they made center wider because the footprint of it, when I got there and mow now, the foundation stones go right up to the blacktop. So it went into center a little bit. So that had to be demolished to build center. It was a dairy farm. So these were dairy barns. And we know from this wonderful letter from her, all kinds of details about the horse stable. And when they bought it in 33, this existing barn had been a carriage barn. So it had a sleigh and horse carriage in it. So this is how it looks today. Carriage house on the right, although I call that my barn, and horse stable on the left. And after I read that letter, you'll see there's no open windows right now. Everything's blocked up. So you can't see in there very well. So as soon as I read this letter, I went rushing out there with the biggest light I could find and was quite thrilled. Well, I'd been around inside it and photographed it. It's in remarkably good condition. Luckily, the owners in the 90s put new roofs on both of these buildings, so that's saved them. But we found these, which are quite wonderful, and I haven't seen these before. These are the posts that divided the horse stalls. And I don't know if you can see where my mouse is. Each one of them has a vertical slot, a big dado joint carved in it. There would have been planks that went from there to your right, and we can see where they were mounted to the wall. So that's what divided the horse stalls. And then we'd never seen before, but if you look here, we have the names of the last horses. We have Minnie, James, and Ned, and Fanny. And then as I was poring over every square inch looking for Lafayette Budd's initials, I found this, which is really great. You won't be able to read this on your screens, probably. This is dated 1909, all written in pencil. It's the date every colt was born, and either their name, Daisy, Big Red, or the name of the local farmer that they sold them to. So that's quite a wonderful thing that we'll be preserving. Then this happened. 1940, just right, all we know is from the letter right at the end of World War II, there was electrical fire in the second floor of the original 1790s house, and the majority of that house was lost. The basement level, which is a walk-in basement where I'm sitting now, totally survived. We still have some original 1790s flooring. We have those walls that I showed you. The 1850s edition, or 1860, sorry, edition survived, as did the windows on the lower level, which I'm sitting right next to those drafty old things now. But then when they rebuild it, boy, you can understand why it looks like a Cape Cod colonial. And we're lucky it even looks like that, because what they did was this. So believe it or not, same house. So these are my 1860 windows, which survived, and that volume survived, and the stone foundation wall and everything in the basement floor survived. But I guess what they did here, the wife at the time had grown up in California and had this fantasy of having this big sun-drenched porch here. So they totally got rid of the front entrance. At this point, they entered down here at the end of the original house. They turned a window into a door. And that's the way they entered the house, and had the living spaces on this level. In this part of the rebuilt old house, they had 2 bedrooms down and 1 bedroom above. They made a connection and made an opening and steps to the upper level of this, where they had the kitchen. So that's what they did right at 4950. And then somewhere along the line, somebody realized that this was not a very functional home. There's a photo of it, by the way. Somebody realized it wasn't a very functional home, so it got changed to what we see now. So they filled the rest of that in. So we're back to having the footprint of the 1890s. And we've got a front entrance, proper living spaces on this floor, bedrooms above. So that's the history of the house. Now, as I said, when we looked at this, we thought, boy, what can we do to this? How are we going to make this better? And what are the problems? So one was, as you can see, it does not look historic at all. Another one was, it feels nothing like a farm. Most people are surprised when I tell them the barns in the corner belong to this property, because they're just physically so far away. And this doesn't look like a farmhouse. So people just imagine the farmhouse got torn down. Also, the property, that stream that you see, divides the property. And when we bought it, all you can see is just a giant wall of 80-foot green trees and brush. So you really felt like you were on like a 2-acre suburban lot and couldn't see anything. No fields, no anything. So here's our game plan so far. Now, you saw the projects that I do, that like our current projects, a single family home renovation is like as much as 18, 20 million plus in the city. But I'm like the cobbler whose children have no shoes. We don't have that kind of money. So for me to properly take this back to the beginning would have meant literally demolish this entire roof structure and starting over, which just wasn't in the cards for us. So instead, we're going to do this. So we're going to clad the roof in low profile standing seam metal. We're going to change all the windows to proper 2/2 divided windows. We're going to sort of taking more of the knot of the 1860s. And since we have those windows, which I'm restoring, we're going to keep that original fabric, make all the other windows match that, put back the front porch that had been here, and repaint the house a proper white color. Put back the fence that had been out along Maple Lane. On the inside, not much to show you yet. I apologize. We've had to replace every inch of electrical, every inch of plumbing, all new mechanical systems. That's what we've been busy doing, and not so much the pretty things. But what we're doing here, and again, this project I can't call a restoration because there's nothing to restore. So I'm calling it a rehabilitation. So I'm either recreating or creating the spirit of the old house. So right now, this photo, we're on the upper level of the house in the stair hall, looking towards Maple. This is the way it was when we bought it, inside one of the 3 dormers. And we've done this. We altered the floor plan to give ourselves a proper, wide, spacious stair hall with the dormer centered on it. And we vaulted the ceiling of all the dormers to give detail that certainly was not original, but it's something done in period houses, and it gives you the feeling of an old house. Same thing in the master bedroom. That's the way it was before and the way it is now. With those vaulted ceilings in another one of the 3 dormers. And another detail we did, we got this from Bob in Bob Schock's house. This actually is an original detail of his 1850s house. What before was this hard line of a modern home. We've curved that plaster everywhere that connection happens to soften it up, and again, a little more historic detail. We do have in the lower portion of the house some of the 1860s doors, which are 4-panel. So all of our new doors are the same replica, same proportion, 4-panel, flat lock, new door hardware, but replicating the old. All of our light switches are push button switches. All of our air conditioning, heating grills are cast iron traditional grills. So that's that. That's the house. But now the bigger picture. And this is going to be a little controversial for some of you, but it's a very important lesson, I think, in preservation. What I've learned through my 40-some years of working on historic buildings and allowing them to live in the future is that, again, we're temporary caretakers. I can only do what I can do here now. What people do in the future, I can't control, but I can influence. So the biggest lesson to learn in preservation is buildings will only be preserved and they'll only survive in the long term if they're useful. Very few people are going to spend money maintaining and restoring something if it doesn't have a use to them. They'll just let it go, which is what happens. So this is part of the story I'm getting to, is giving buildings value. Another one is circling back, why doesn't this feel like a farm? And the house, and why do the barns not feel like they belong to the property? And why do we have no farm fields? So we're back right now to the original configuration. These are the buildings as they sat on 152 acres. And as you can see, no other buildings in sight. So of course, the scale of the property then, it felt like the barns belonged to the property. If you look at where we are now, you'll see that no longer feels that way. The scale of the property has changed. Now we do have homes around us. It does feel more suburban-like, not farm-like. And you can see even from this image, the barn feels like it's way over there, and maybe it even feels like it belongs more to the property across the street than it does to our property. The other thing you can see, as I was talking about before, it's heavily wooded, no fields, which takes away from the farm feeling. So here are my big moves. This is back to that aerial photo of the property when we bought it. And here's what we want to do. And we're in the process of doing. So one, if anybody's driven up center in the last few weeks, you'll see that I'm in the middle of creating this field back here. I'm clearing 4 acres by myself. I've cut down about 180 trees so far and grubbed countless other ones. I'm about to rent a giant excavator to get the stumps out. And then this is going to be a Timothy field. We're going to be doing Timothy hay. And working with Bob, we're actually going to be doing this on his farm and several other farms to provide high quality Timothy hay to the horse farms in the area. Now, this is partly, it makes this feel like a farm again. Mostly it's because it fulfills my childhood dream of becoming a farmer and I get to play on my farm again. But here's the really big move. I want to move the barns from here over to here. Here's the multiple reasons for this. As I said, these buildings will only be restored and survive into the far future if they have a value. Right now, they don't have much of a value. The main barn, as I call it, is a bank barn. So you can enter it on grade, and it's open down below. The center foundation stone wall is collapsed entirely. The front one is about halfway collapsed. I need to be able to park 6,000-pound tractors in there, and I need to be able to store hay in there, neither of which I can do on a wood floor. The barn and the stable, all the sills have rotted. They're settling in place. They just don't have much use to me. So I want to do this for two reasons. One, once I move them, I have useful buildings. Also, the other problem is that the horizontal beams of the main barn are too low to drive a tractor under. So when I move these barns, I'll be able to raise the main barn to the point that I've got the clearance I need under those beams. They'll have a proper new footing and foundation, which will be clad with the stone that we have now, so they'll look like they have original foundations under them. The stable will become a combination of a wood shop and a bay that I will use to work on equipment in. For the future, though, those buildings now are nicely situated, a short walk from the house. They can be used as a garage, because our current garage it only works if you've got like a very, very small car. You certainly can't park an SUV in it. So this will give people places to park. If someone down the road wants to have a horse, they can have that field for a pasture. They can have the stable for the stable. So that makes these buildings preserved and useful for preserving and prosperity. The other thing it does, though, it fixes that scale problem I just talked about, because even as you can see right now, what this does is now it makes this feel like a proper upstate farm complex with the buildings clustered near each other. So what we'll end up with then is we will go from this to this. So we'll have the restoration I mentioned before on the house to make it feel more like a farmhouse. The various outbuildings will be painted barn red. The barns will have been moved and the siding all fixed, windows put in them, the new fence put back that was originally along Maple. And we'll have a proper farm again. And from our house already, we can see out our windows to the new hayfield, which has transformed the feeling of being in the house. It feels more like a farm now and not just a suburban house. So that's my presentation.
Well, thank you, Joe. This is Cynthia speaking. I want to thank you. I know people are going to have questions. And I have some questions, but I realized that I didn't make the connection for people that I should have when we were starting, which is our board member, Bob Schock, had you working with him on the restoration of his 18th century Dutch barn. And it was through Bob and your relationship, Bob, who is our co-chair of programs, that Joe came to be with us tonight. And I'm so glad that that connection was made. And I think this has really been fascinating. My question before we go on to other people, I'm just taking advantage of my position here. I love the idea that you're moving the barns. I've been driving by those barns for years and worrying about them. I worry about things in our town, old buildings in our town that are being neglected. And I think you're very right to say we have to do what needs to be done to make these buildings useful again to people. So I think it's a great idea. I wish you could do something about the roof line on the house, but I understand you can't.
Yeah, I know. Maybe someday when I get a super big project. we certainly haven't ruled it out,
But it's beautiful what you've done indoors with the curving dormers. I mean, I think it's gorgeous. It's beautiful.
I also sort of thought that it's a poetic thing. This relationship to the Schultz family of all people, which we didn't really know about. And then obviously Schultzville is no stranger to moving buildings and repurposing them.
Right. So, look at the Masonic Lodge. Yeah. It's a great country tradition. One of the things that's distinctive about the barns at least the big barn. I haven't paid much attention to the stable, but there are these vertical board and batten doors and siding on them. Are you going to repurpose those? Are you going to keep those?
As to the greatest extent possible, I'm keeping literally every piece of wood on them. In fact, just about a weekend ago, people won't notice, but the horse stable, I went out and there were a number of loose boards, and there were boards even laying around on the ground in the weeds that, believe it or not, weren't rotted. And so I actually reinstalled all of those. And we do have, thankfully for prior owners, the lower level of the barn is chock full of not only beams. Someone at some point took the loft out of the barn, but thankfully they saved every single one of the beams, which I'll be putting back. I'll be putting the loft back in the barn. And they also saved a lot of siding that came from, I don't know where. There's one, the end of this horse stable facing center, that's all new wood. I'm not sure what happened at some point in time, why it had to be replaced, but they salvaged all the wood that was still good. So we've got some good wood left, and where we don't have enough, I'll be having wood milled to match the same profile and same species.
That's great. I wish people would always leave anything that they've taken off their house or their property, leave it somewhere around there. Just in the past couple of days, I've been writing the history of the Creek Meeting House so that we can use that for planning the restoration. And I came across an article, it's not hard to come across it, it's on our website, by George B. Greenwood on the history of the Creek Meeting House. But I had never read the tail end of it, where he has a little thing that he just treats as kind of a throwaway addendum or addenda. And I read that, and it said that the movable partitions, the shutters that used to divide the men's from the women's side of the Creek Meeting House, had been stored up in the attic of the Creek Meeting House during the period that it was owned by the Grange, which was between 1927 and 1992. But as of the time he wrote his article, they had transferred some of those over to what was then the retirement home for musicians. And that was immediately north of the Creek Meeting House. We all know it as the Abel Peters House. Abel Peters in 1775 sold the land on which, anyway, I contacted the owner, who was very gracious, but he assured me there's nothing remaining of those partitions, which it would have been just so wonderful now, a mere 30 years later, if we had them, or even 25 years later, if they were still up there in the attic for us to have as we're restoring the building. So long way of saying, I think it's great what you're doing. And let's open the, if we can maybe go into question and answer if you're ready and willing.
Absolutely.
I do see something from Barbara Sweet, who's put something in the chat, which I'll read as a beginning point. I think she says, do you ever add a time capsule to any of your projects?
We actually have already added one here. So yeah, we here we used a heavy glass bottle with a stopper in it, and we put some things in a wall that we had to rebuild. So it's buried in that wall for someone to find. And I have in prior clients' homes, there are certain periods of homes where they would conceal in the newel post of a stair drawings, some original drawings. And then also in some houses more closer to the very early 20s, late 1890s, early 20s, there would be a detail in the top of the turned newel post. There'd be a little detail on the top, a disc that would be wood. And the tradition was that when you paid off your mortgage, you replace that with a round piece of mother of pearl. So people that came to your home could tell that you've paid off your house.
Yeah. Showing off, showing off. Let's go off of screen sharing if we can, and then we can get the rest of our folks back on screen, and we can see if I don't know how to do, if we can see everybody. Oh no, what did I do? Got to go back. I've lost you all, but there you are. Okay, I'm back. Okay, Craig Marshall has his hand up. Craig.
Hi, Joe. Hey. You may have said this and I just didn't catch it, but when you move the barn, are you dismantling it and rebuilding on a new foundation, or are you moving it over to the new foundation?
Moving it over. There's a company not too far away from Bob, actually, in Pennsylvania, that I've already had here twice. And they will be, so I'll dig the process. Process is we dig and pour the footings. Then they move the two buildings over and park them above those footings. Then you build the block wall up, because these buildings, as you know, are never going to be perfectly square, so we can't quite. So you build the block wall up, then they lower it down, and then we'll clad it with stone to conceal the concrete block.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No comments or thoughts?
Very enjoyable speech.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, Barbara, did you have something else? You're muted, Barbara.
Barbara, there. Okay. There. I got it. I just wanted to thank you, Joe, for bringing this to us, because there are so many historic homes around here. And what you are doing is something that is unbelievable. But I know you're going to have fun, because you sound like you're really enjoying it. And you're doing something. Thank you.
I'm getting a little tired of cutting trees down.
Yeah. I was driving.
The first dozen were fun, but 188 gets to be it's a bit tiring, but anyway.
Yeah. That's something people don't realize, that Clinton, well, in the 18th century, first the land had to be cleared. And I saw another description as I'm doing this writing of how the land looked. And of course, it was just a bunch of stumps as people cleared the land. And then they used the trees, the logs, to sort of form the fences around here. It must have been pretty crude looking.
Yeah.
This community, which was totally cleared in the 19th century, has just, and it was a wheat growing community. It was providing wheat for New York City. It's hard to imagine that when you look at all the woods and forests that we have. In fact, it was shipped down the Hudson to New York, and then was transshipped to the West Indies, where all of the agricultural effort was going into producing sugar for the sugar plantations, of course. And the enslaved people there were not growing any foodstuffs. So we were actually, here in the Hudson Valley, the breadbasket for the sugar trade in the West Indies. And it wasn't until the Erie Canal and a blight that hit the wheat crops that this area began to turn to grazing and cattle and that kind of agriculture, which then, of course, phased out in the 20th century as we became, and the land just went back to trees. So I drove by, saw your 4 acres. I hadn't known to look for it, but I saw it, and it's very impressive. And that's another part of restoring the historic landscape, is just getting us back to a farming area. Yeah, great.
So, as you know, when the farmers were clearing their land and they got rid of the stumps, any stones that they were taking out, they made into stone walls.
Yeah.
Are you planning to carry on that tradition?
Absolutely, absolutely. Our stone, we've got a lot of stone walls here, I have to say, and so I'll be adding to those. And Bob and I are actually looking at some equipment because we're going to be his fields. We're going to be plowing to be able to sow the timothy, to be able to get rid of the weeds without having to use Roundup. And certainly that's just going to bring up all the rocks. And you've got so there's some amazing equipment now to help pick those rocks up, and then we can use them for something.
Yeah. Even in my little gardens, which are really little, nothing like a farm, but you think you've got them cleared of stones. You go through the winter and you come back next spring, and there they are again. They've just bubbled up.
Right back up.
Yeah.
From the frost. It's just raised it back up to the surface. So it's really interesting.
Anyone else?
Anyone else?
I'm just going to say we have a stone wall behind our house, and sometimes I kind of wonder about the people that put it there. But you have no idea. I know that the whole area was a farm, and we found cow bones floating around when we built our house here. We did put in a time capsule ourselves. Someone had told us that if you take tin foil and I think saran wrap or something, and you wrap stuff around it. And we took some contemporary items from the time and did that. I don't know what shape they're in. Somebody will find it someday. I'll be long gone.
You know, when you said Herb, I don't know who built them, or I had an occasion this week to attend by Zoom a really interesting program by the Hudson River Valley Institute by a historian. Her name is Nicole Safford Maskiel, and she is an associate professor of history at the University of South Carolina, and she is looking into the history of the early grand estates of the Hudson Valley and their involvement with slavery. And it had never occurred to me until she mentioned it that many of the stone walls that we look at in our communities were in fact built by enslaved people who were clearing the land and building those stone walls. So that's a little something to think of also. Although you in Hyde Park, probably those estates were after slavery, but so probably not enslaved people doing that. But certainly out here in the backcountry where slavery persisted longer in these early farms, there probably were people who were enslaved who were involved in some of the heavy labor.
Well, we're some distance away from there to the eastern part of town, and in what was the edge of the Rogers farm. And it was there's one older house down near Crum Elbow and Rogers that I think was the farmhouse, and then eventually everything became suburbanized.
Yeah. So, but anyway, are there any other? I mean, I'm rattling on here, but Craig has something else. Great.
Joe, you're restoring this as a farm. Does that include farm animals at some point?
Well, I'm not sure if we're going to call them farm animals, but my wife has determined we're going to get 4 pygmy goats. So we've been looking into that. We hope to get those in the spring, actually. So we already have the building for them, and I've certainly cut down plenty of cedar posts now to make the enclosure. But yeah, we're gonna start with that. Whether we'll move on to chickens and things, well, is yet to be seen.
Get some little miniature horses. They're very
yeah.
And you already have their names already.
Yeah.
You can give them historic names. Any other questions or comments? Well, this has really been fascinating, and it's also been nice as a conversation, which we don't often have. So you've inspired us to chat more than we usually do, Joe. So thank you.
Well, again, we love this community, so we're going to be here forever.
That's great. Welcome to our community.
Oh, Nancy and Joe have questions.
Yes, okay.
Joe and I would like to thank you, Joe, and the Historical Society for making this happen. The passion that Joe shows in this project is very clear. And we're just so lucky to have him in this community and doing what he's doing with this house. It's wonderful.
Yeah, we're here.
Real contribution. So that's great. That's great. Any other kudos? I also want to thank Kathy McMahon, who did the publicity for this and has managed our Zoom program. So we always owe a debt of gratitude to Kathy McMahon for making this happen, as well as of course Bob Schock and of course Joe Vance. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Interesting Friday evening. Thank you.
See you all.
And Craig for Craig is also being thanked from the Peanut Gallery. Elliot Werner over here. So thank you, Craig, for everything you've done. Okay. All righty. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.